All right, I am chatting all things Florida Gators with my friend Allie Peak from a Peak Inside Gators Football. Allie, thank you for joining me.
Hey TJ, this is a nice change of roles here. I like being on your shows.
On the other side, yeah, nice throwback too. Uh,
Yeah.
Shout out to the few and far between Peak to Pit listeners that exist out there. So, all right, I have a bold take, and I think you're going to agree with it, though that doesn't happen often when we chat, that UF could do something this year that would likely, I don't know, strike fear into haters' hearts, opponents' hearts, rivals' hearts. I want to talk to you about that in a moment, but before we get there, talk to me about the mood of the UF fan base. Is it frustration? Is it apathy? Where is the fan base today?
Okay, so I think if you'd asked me this question 2 weeks ago, I would have had a different answer than I have today. So going into Florida spring game, I expected to see kind of a lot of apathy. I think that if you kind of take the pulse of the fan base online, there's a lot of people that just have the attitude, there's nothing that you can show me now that's going to give me a different opinion on where we are right now. We just need to see wins come August. And but then I went to the spring game and I saw thousands of people there that were so pumped to see people like DJ Lagway and LJ McCray, see Mertz back for another year, see what this offensive line looks like now, see if the defense has improved. And the mood was so much better than I expected it to be. Now, I think that the fan base is still very much in a wait and see mode because, they've had multiple years of not good enough for Florida standards. But I think that they're kind of hopeful that this is the year that Billy Napier's plane is built, so to speak. The plan is in place and that we actually see the payoff of the building that we've been going through.
How much of that, you mentioned him specifically, but how much of that excitement is centered around specifically DJ Lagway?
I think a lot of it, and I think it's twofold. I think that fans are super excited to see what he is going to do on the field, right? But I also think the idea of DJ Lagway is the idea that Billy Napier is a top recruiter, which is what he was brought in to do at the University of Florida. Dan Mullen could coach. Dan Mullen struggled recruiting. So the concept of bringing Billy Napier in is that you had a guy who was going to come in guns blazing, was going to sign top classes, and that was going to potentially produce national championships down the road. And I think that that's kind of what DJ Lagway signifies maybe for the fan base, is the fact that we do have a guy who is capable of being an elite recruiter. But then you look at DJ Lagway, the player, right? This is a guy who was incredible in high school. I've talked to him several times. He is so down to earth, so likable as a human being. And then you get to the Orange and Blue game and you see what he's capable of doing on the field. And I think there's just glimpses of this superstar to come, so to speak. This is a guy that should be getting ready for a senior prom. And here he was really looking very poised and very, wise beyond his years on the field. And he gets to learn from Graham Mertz, who has been a really good leader for Florida, who's been a solid player, who's going into his fifth year and has a lot of knowledge to pass on. And, I also think Gator fans are a little bit reminiscent of Chris Leak and Tim Tebow, right? His Chris Leak's senior year, Tim Tebow's freshman year, where they had a system that got to, highlight Tim's skill set that he brought to the table. I think Gator fans are hoping that we're going to see packages for Lagway that fit what he brings to the table. And then you have that steady senior leader to bring, that to the table for the Gators. And listen, I'm not predicting a 2006 national championship by any stretch, but I think Gator fans get excited about the possibility of a similar situation quarterback-wise this upcoming season.
Yeah, and having the most important position on the field taken care of doesn't fix everything else, but it certainly helps to at least have the most important thing taken care of. So talking about Napier specifically, and I know the answer overall is just to win, right? Like that's the easy answer. Is there anything he can do between now and that Miami game in the Swamp, or is it just like get through the summer as fast as possible to start to get things turned back, more in favor of his way?
I think winning is going to cure all the ills, but I am hopeful that Florida is going to have an incredibly intense summer. I think that one of the things that Coach Napier figured out, over through trial and error, truthfully, over the last couple of years, is that the level of intensity you have to play with to be in the SEC is just a notch above what he was used to. I think you saw that we've replaced an entire strength and conditioning staff because they just weren't good enough. They didn't push these players enough. They didn't necessarily light the fire enough. I think we saw the same thing with some of the coaches that were replaced. We need accountability, and we really need an intensity that I don't know that the Napier regime has seen prior to kind of where we are right now. Word out of Gainesville is that the intensity in workouts was just incredibly ramped up this spring. Even practices were far more aggressive and guys kind of getting into it than in previous years under Napier. And that's good. That's what Florida needs, because they have got to be able to bully their opponent come fall. But you got to do that to each other in the weight room and the locker room before it goes onto the field in the fall, right?
So what are things that you mentioned recruiting, so I know that's up there. So outside of that, what are things that you do really like about Billy Napier? I know that, he's still kind of in prove it mode to a lot of the fan base, but what are things that stand out that he does really well that you do like?
I think Billy Napier does a ton of things incredibly well. I think he always has a plan, right? And I think that is important. I think he surrounds himself with really knowledgeable people. I think he is willing to, span the entire country for hiring purposes, right? He's not a guy that just hires his friends that he's worked with elsewhere. He really, you look at the different states that he's pulled guys off of. He is looking nationwide when he's trying to fill out that staff. And he is a great recruiter. And when you talk to some of the guys that have signed with him, committed to him, their families tell you that they love that Billy Napier is so genuine. They feel like when they have time with him, that they're the only people in the room, that he truly cares about them as a person, not just as a football player. And that is something that wins over hearts and minds, right? And it's important to parents, and it's important to the development of these men, right? You're part of your job as a football coach at this college is to take 18-year-old boys and turn them into 22, 23-year-old men. Now, winning is very high up on that priority list, but this is another one of your responsibilities. And I think that he does it incredibly well. I think he treats his staff incredibly well. I think he treats his current players incredibly well. I think, you look at the position Florida's in right now, where they have 86 scholarship players for the 85 spots. And going into the spring transfer portal window, we were talking about like, okay, well, they need a wide receiver or two, they need an edge or two, do they need an offensive lineman? And Florida's in this interesting position where they don't have a whole lot of spots to give, if any at all. And, while I can see why Gator fans might think that that's a problem because they want to sign a couple more really good wide receivers or an edge or whatever, but I think it kind of makes you understand how these players feel about Billy Napier, that nobody's jumping ship, right? They're not looking for another opportunity. They're happy where they are. They think that the train is left the station and is moving in the right direction. They believe in what Billy Napier is selling. And I think that is really important. The mood inside the locker room does not match the mood that you see on the internet, right? They believe in themselves. Graham Mertz had a quote a few weeks ago where he said, "We're not trying to prove other people wrong. We're trying to prove ourselves right." And I think that he has done such a great job at being a master motivator for these players when, the win-loss column doesn't give a whole lot of confidence to them, but their head coach gives a whole lot of confidence to them. And that's the first step in eventually winning a whole bunch of ball games.
We're eventually going to talk about the negative side of what things could look like. But in this, to wrap this one up, if things go well this year, which it is daunting, and the last couple of years have been tough, I truly believe that, if Napier finds a way to survive this year, which we'll talk about maybe what that number is in just a minute, but if he finds a way to survive this year and can continue to recruit with maybe more wins at his back, maybe a more unified NIL front that I know you've talked about some, I think that worries a lot of people. I think a fully invested Florida right now, I think Billy Napier, maybe deservedly so, is the butt of a lot of jokes, and he's had some mishandles, whether they be not his fault with NIL or very much his fault with special teams or just dumb things that he's done in games. I think there's some warranted jokes that have come along with that, but I truly do believe there's enough right that he does that if he can just find a way to survive this year, rivals, haters, whatever you want to call it. I mean, I think they become more and more worried. And that's even saying as somebody who is very much outside of the Florida camp. I think that if he can find a way to get through this year, having Lagway, having McCray, others that have joined, I think it makes other people start to take notice, especially considering how tough the schedule is.
You know, Coach Napier had at one point a top 3 class. It ended up being a top 10 class. And we consider that way out recruiting your record, right? So imagine the kind of classes that Napier will start stacking on top of each other if he can put together a winning season. And that should terrify rivals, right? His building process has been slow. There are coaches that have gone other places and won in a year or two. And I think that's what's frustrating to Florida fans. But if Napier is allowed to see through this process, I do think it's one of those things where you're building a cement foundation versus a wood foundation. And, this past class was really, really good. There's a couple superstars in there. You mentioned them, DJ Lagway and LJ McCray, but there's others in that class that have been standing out as well. So you take that class, you add another one. Let's say Florida wins 7 or 8 games this year. Napier's keeping his job. That seat is not nearly as warm if you win 7 or 8 games against the toughest schedule in the country. So then 2025, let's say you got a top 5 class. The next year, you win 9 or 10 games. Florida could finish the 2026 class with a top 3 signing class as long as they continue to add a couple more wins each season. And that should scare people because then at that point, it's a well-oiled machine, right?
Yeah, the 2025 schedule also really tough. The SEC didn't do a lot of favors there either, but a second year of Lagway, presumably, if he's there and Napier's there and things stay pretty locked in. And I understand the rush that we are in college football to want to win quickly. But if you ask me right now, like I could be the biggest Napier hater, around. I think that results in 2024 matter, but I also think that there is like Napier versus the field. I mean, unless like Saban's coming out of retirement, I think Napier has a better chance to win more games than the field in 2025. Now, if he wins 4 games in 2024, it doesn't matter, right? Like you have to eventually say like, hey man, we gotta win. But like, I mean, would you agree with that? Like, I think, because what's going to happen if they move on from him? They're going to blow it up. You're going to have a brand new team. You're going to get decimated in the transfer portal. Does that new coach, maybe bring enough people in? I mean, maybe. But do they have the first year turnaround again against an equally difficult schedule in 2025? I don't think so. I think continuity in 2025 will be the best answer for UF. Now, again, you win 4 games, you're not going to get that chance. But I think Napier has the best chance of success in 2025 and then beyond if he can start winning.
Yeah. Well, I think something that we say on my channel on a regular basis is that progress isn't linear, right? And I think that while there's probably a minimum number that Florida needs to win in 2024 to be able to have Napier see that 2025 season, I don't know that the factors are just numbers. Now, if you only win 4 games, more than likely he will not be the coach in 2025. But I think winning, let's say 6 games, but being in all of the other ones and not losing them because of bonehead mistakes at the end, too many men on the field, not enough men on the field, 2 numbers, whatever. If it's not a controllable, right, for why you lose, I can see them saying, okay, I mean, it was only 6, but he was in all the other ones. We can see the progress, even if the scoreboard doesn't yet reflect that. I could see that being enough for 2025. And then if that happens, I think 2025, they really are in a good place, right? I think that DJ Lagway not only is incredibly valuable on the field, I think he's going to prove to be incredibly valuable on the recruiting trail too. So you get a couple top wide receivers to come in because they want to play with him. You get some huge bruising offensive linemen because they want to protect him. Suddenly your team starts to look competitive, very different, right? And all of the processes are in place. And Napier actually got kind of a vote of confidence, or I don't know if that's exactly the right word, but some support from Coach Mullen, who, the previous coach to Coach Napier, when he said, like, at some point they've got to give somebody the opportunity to build it out the way that they're envisioning. And college football is such a what have you done for me lately sport. But does Florida really want to be the program that every 2.5 to 3.5 years they're looking for a new head coach? At some point, that devalues the job, right? So I would caution Florida and Florida fans truly to be 100% certain that what is being built isn't salvageable before they want to move on. Because when you move on, you knock down every single thing that has been built and you start over. So this process, this wait until next year, gets extended out, right? So I would be very certain he's not the guy before you're willing to do anything.
Yeah, and there are certain situations that he certainly could have helped himself. If they could have added one win to the year before to get to 7 wins, right?
Yeah.
Maybe that Vandy game. If they could have added probably the two most likely, the Arkansas where you miss a field goal to go overtime, the 4th and 17 against Missouri, and there were other games they certainly could have won in 23 as well. But if you just had those two, and so you're looking at 7 wins in back-to-back years, it's just not so hot now.
It's so different, right?
The vibe would be way different.
I mean, let's say you beat Florida State last season, which I know kills you to hear, but like that seat's cold. Right? If that has happened, if you have that Arkansas, not Missouri game, and you have that Florida State game, this conversation is totally different. Florida was right on the cusp, but I think the thing that's frustrating to fans is that it felt like they didn't get over the hump because of self-inflicted wounds, which feels different than we just weren't good enough. Florida, they lost some games where they just weren't good enough, but they lost some games that they were in to the very end, and a crucial mistake kept them from winning. And I think that has been what has influenced this fan base more so than just the losses where the team that beat us was just straight up better.
I want to ask you about your boldest or hottest take for this 2024 season. But first, where can people find you? Where can they follow your work?
You can find me on Twitter, Allie_Peak, a peek inside Gators football on YouTube. Come over and check it out. Lots of good Gator content.
Yeah, we will link it down in the description. All right. I'll give you a little bit of a head start to think about it. But hottest take, boldest take for 2024, they certainly won't get clipped or shared anywhere, but it is a hot take. So if you're wrong, it's kind of what it's for.
You know what? I think my hot take is that Billy Napier is going to be here in 2025. I think, I don't know that I would have said that a few months ago, but I do feel like things are starting to move in the right direction. I think there's been some light bulbs that have gone off within the university, things outside of Coach Napier's control maybe, but that really do help him on the recruiting trail and help him within the facility get those extra wins. I think that it was a reality check that Florida's strength and conditioning staff was just not good enough. And because you and I are friends in real life too, that this has been a conversation in my household for more than a year at this point, where we knew the strength and conditioning staff just wasn't good enough, but it's like it hadn't been realized inside the program, but that has been fixed. I think some of the coaches that they have brought in, I think Ron Roberts was an incredibly valuable hire. And I think it was a really smart hire too, because I think that there's a chance they realized that maybe Austin Armstrong was in just a tad over his head, just a little too green for that big of a role. But you wanted to see him develop, and you thought that he has some fire in him and he has a gift in him that he's going to be a great defensive coordinator. How do you bring somebody in to coach him up without that really, really hurting the ego? You bring in his mentor, right? Like, I think that was a brilliant move by Coach Napier, but it's going to be the controllables. Can you clean those up? But my hot take is he's going to be here in 2025.
We are going to talk about the opposite side of this. What may the UF program look like if things don't go according to plans, if they don't hit that minimum number? If you want to check that out, make sure that you're locked in with the channel. We'll talk about it on our very next video.